Hi, I'm Pearl. Wow, I really feel this video has been a long time in the making. It's been one of those things I've been thinking about a little bit the last couple of weeks, and really it's reflecting on stuff that I've been processing and learning about for, coming on 40 years. And it's a very sensitive subject as well. I'm going to be talking about suicide and suicidal feelings. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is that I saw a video recently, and sometimes when we're working in spiritual circles, and I've done a lot of work. I've worked with a lot of teachers, read a lot of books, gone around the world and worked with lots of gurus. Sometimes we can kind of beat ourselves up with spiritual ideas, and I quite like that now we understand this expression called toxic positivity, where we kind of judge ourselves and judge other people for not being positive all the time. And it's really about working with light and dark. Life isn't all light, life isn't all dark. But those are both sides of it. You wouldn't see this picture if there wasn't some light and some dark. But I wanted to keep this very grounded and very practical. That's what I love about what I do, is I can be very theoretical and think big things and big thoughts, but then it's bringing it back to the practical and step by step. And I wanted to share a story, a time and experience in my life I don't really think I've ever shared with anyone, and I don't think it's something I've even spoken to my therapist about. And it was really when I was a young teenager, and that's what I wanted to talk about with this, because I find that whenever there are conversations about suicide, obviously it has to be handled carefully, but I find that some of the material and the conversations about these kind of feelings, when it comes to young people, are often very patronizing and condescending, and are really a bit kind of like, oh, well, I know better than you because I'm older than you. And that kind of annoys me, because when I reflect on the way that I felt, and I had a period when I felt suicidal as a young teenager, there was nothing immature about that. And I realise now, being a lovely, older, more mature person, that the kind of feelings I was struggling with are the kind of feelings that people struggle with no matter what age they are. But, I think as you get older, I don't know, sometimes I think it's harder when you get older. But what I really wanted to talk about in this is how I felt at the time, what helped me, and to really try and help people, if you're going through this, to understand perhaps why. Obviously everybody's different, so it might be different to you, it might not be that useful to you. I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I wanted to talk about this because I wish that when I was going through that I had any kind of help, because I was going through this, probably about 1986, and around that time, we just didn't have the support that is available now. We didn't have, I think maybe have started to have sort of helplines and things, but I wouldn't have had a clue how to access that. I had no idea what a psychotherapist was. And even, I think in my 20s, when I tried to seek help in my 20s, I was shut down by my doctor and said, just go away. So we're in a much better place now for finding and accessing support. But at the same time, there are still very well-meaning people who are not right for you, who get it wrong. And I really feel like I made a lot of progress when I was with my third therapist, who I contacted because I went through another period of, or really just having really one moment or one day when I felt suicidal. And I look back and I think, gosh, that was great that I had that one experience when I was in early 30s, and I reached out for help straight away. And I'm really glad that I did that. It meant the world to me. But going back, to when I was a young teenager. There was an incident that sparked that off for me, and what it was is that my father died, and we were estranged, and he was estranged from my whole family. And I really didn't have any concept that he was that ill. And then suddenly we heard that he died. And it was a very strange time because I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. None of us were, none of us kids. And I just didn't know what to do. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And we just kind of went on with our normal lives. I think as a lot of people do after some kind of trauma. And I just didn't know how to process the emotions that I had, the grief, and also just so many unresolved things with my dad. You know, I think I was so in shock at that time, because even though I had been so angry at him because he was a very difficult man, and you know, I think part of me always dreamed that there was going to be some kind of reconciliation. There was going to be some kind of big, you know, dramatic film-like scene when we would come back together and he would tell me how much he always loved me and it wasn't my fault, all those things. And of course I didn't get that. So suddenly I had all these feelings, and in the past there'd been years when I didn't see him and birthdays when I didn't see him, and I didn't realise for a very, very long time later that a lot of that was just about feeling worthless and unlovable. Because no matter how bad he was, if he was that bad and he didn't want to be around me, I must have been pretty awful. And so a lot of the work that I've done is really about coming through and understanding, you know, these feelings that we have sometimes, that we're just worthless and that people would be better off without us, things like that. But that wasn't really my feeling back then. Back then my feeling was really being trapped, you know, feeling trapped. And the visual that I have in my head is really this sort of big black iron trunk that we used to have at home. And it was a big, huge, heavy box. And as soon as you put like anything in it, you couldn't move it. And I think that visual to me is how all those emotions felt, was like this big trunk with all these emotions locked inside that I would never be able to handle and I would never be able to deal with. And there was never going to be any way out. And that's really how I felt, that I just was trapped by these emotions that I could never escape. And so at that time I just started to really think about suicide and imagine it and do what they call now, you know, now we would describe that as suicidal ideation, I think. And like I say, in my 30s, when I had a moment like that, I was finding a therapist and I was saying, no, this is wrong. I don't want to feel like this. You know, I don't want to ever feel like this. But back then, I had no idea that there would ever be anybody who could help me. I had no idea that I would ever be feeling any different to how I did. And that's really why I want to do this video, because if there's anything you're going through at the moment, I just want to say it gets so much better. And it took me so long to kind of figure things out and to start to release and unlock those emotions. And it's probably not what you want to hear. But one of the things that happened that made things easier or changed that dynamic for me was that actually life got much harder and that we had another tragedy in the family. And suddenly I went from that feeling to just got to do this, got to do this, got to get on with this, got to get on with that. And I think in a big part realizing that my family would really not cope if anything happened to me. So I actually dealt in that second or third, whatever trauma, much better. I was operating at a sort of a higher level. getting everything done, or all the work, everything, doing housework, all that kind of thing. And it's one of those things that often we find we deal in the midst of trauma, we deal with things much better than we do in the sort of lulls or in the post-trauma situation. And I've talked about that before. Because really when we're going through stuff, we have a lot of adrenaline, or maybe we just have one thing to do and something else to do, and it carries us through because we're kind of we're in a situation where we really have to get things done. And I was thinking about this before, and I was thinking, it's a bit like when you're thirsty. When you're really, really thirsty, it's really hard to think about anything else because that's your main priority. And we don't think about being hungry because we're just so thirsty. And then if we're hungry, we think about that and we focus on that. But when we do have all our needs met, got a roof over our head, enough food to eat, enough money, all those kind of things, sometimes it actually feels worse because then we have to deal with all these other needs that we have, to grieve or to process emotion, to deal with the feelings that we have. And suddenly, when we're in those quieter times, the peace, we often say that, sometimes the scariest thing in the world is peace, because and the quiet, because that's when these feelings come up. And that's when we don't have the distraction of something more urgent. And sometimes that's why we keep putting ourselves in situations where we have an urgent, because it helps us. It helps us to be doing something else so that we don't have to feel these emotions. And really this is what I talked about a lot in my book about fear of success, because our fear of success is our fear of life. And our fear of life is really about fear of feeling our emotions. Because once we feel joyful, we also awaken the negative emotion, and we have to feel those as well. And so sometimes when we've been through a trauma that's really brought us to that point, that point of feeling suicidal, it can be easier if we then go and live our life by masking emotions, by hiding emotions, whether it's with work, with other things, or it could be with things like alcohol, with drugs. And somebody once said, Domingo always says, our greatest addictions are addiction to suffering. So sometimes what we do is we just use a sort of day-to-day suffering, like complaining about everything or having some drama, having some problem that stops us from having to deal with what's going on right here. So what do you do about it? If you are feeling this way, what do you do about it? How does it get better? How do you help yourself? And the first thing I would say is there is so much help now. There's so much help available. And the hardest thing is often to ask for help. But I know that I'm so glad that I did. When I got older, I'm so glad. And then I asked somebody for help. And then when I didn't think that therapy was working anymore, I moved on, did it again. And then the third one kind of stuck. She kind of stuck around. And I kept working and changing and being different and changing. I say changing who I was, but really it was about letting go of a lot of the stuff that wasn't really me. So that's one way, reach out for help. But a lot of time I didn't do that. And what I've learned over all these years is that big black trunk of feelings that I was incapable of dealing with at that age. I mean, look, I still find it hard at my age. Those feelings, they kind of escape from the trunk. And they do that because we're living. And the more we live in a way that is wholehearted or joyful or I would say, seeking our bliss, the more it's like those negative emotions or the difficult emotions just kind of start to seep out. Because we know what's truthful. When we live like that, we know that life is good. We know that we're not unlovable. We know that we're not worthless. And so those feelings or fears start to get smaller, and they start to kind of, like smoke out of this box, they start to kind of disappear. And it gets easier and easier to then open the whole thing. Because having to deal with these feelings, much later in life, I've already had all these experiences where I know, hang on, I know that's not true. And I know that I can get through this because I've got through so many other things. But sometimes the way that we get through this and we deal with these emotions is that we have other situations, even other traumas or difficulties, that bring up very similar feelings. So for me, when I broke up with people broke up with me in my 20s, it was so painful, it was so hard, because it brought back all those feelings of loss, letting go. Well, not letting go, I didn't have a choice really, but all those feelings of feeling unlovable, feeling worthless. Even in my 40s, going through a breakup, I really hit the bottom of those feelings. And it made me realise that it really wasn't about, completely about the person I was dating. It was about those feelings, that fear and that pain of somebody not being there. And again, that feeling of feeling worthless, which is a horrible feeling. And I hope that all the things that I do, anything I do, helps anybody who's reading a book or watching a film to not feel that way, because you're worth it. You're on here. But the other thing I wanted to share, and I was thinking about this, is I went out and I looked for healing, and I'd done over 500 types of healing around the world, all kinds of massages and beautiful things and trips and holidays and places and meditations and lovely things, going out with animals and swimming with manatees and cuddling grey whales. And I think for me that was always a really wonderful thing, that when animals come up to you and you have these animal experiences, it's like, wow, I must be all right that the animals want to come and give me a kiss, and manatee wants to kiss me up here, because animals feel your vibration, your energy. The same thing with small children and dogs and everybody, So letting people love you, letting animals, come to you is a wonderful way of healing. But going through all these types of healing, and obviously there's a great big book that I've written with 500 types of healing. The real healing is what happens when we just stay alive. And the best way I can find to sort of explain this is, if you have a horrible accident and you go to hospital, the doctors are really just trying to keep you alive. So if you were to break a bone, it was a really bad break and they had to operate and they had to pin it together or whatever, they would do that so that the bone could then heal. But what makes the bone heal is your body. Because naturally, we heal. Our bodies heal given time, provided we don't hurt ourselves again. Our minds heal, provided we don't keep hurting ourselves. Our spirits heal, because it's our nature. It is being human. Our mind, body, spirit will heal given time, provided we can keep going, provided that we don't hurt ourselves again. We heal. And that's what happens when we stay alive. The damage that's been done, the pain, the trauma does heal. And I think I've experienced in my life that we heal faster when we live authentically, when we live our passions, our bliss, when we do the things that we love. It helps us generally heal faster. But we shouldn't necessarily judge ourselves. And I certainly would never want to judge myself back then, or anybody who's going through anything like this, for not living blissfully, anything like that. And there have definitely been many, many years of my life that I really was just going through the motions, where I had a job that I didn't like, and friends who were decent people, but wanted to go out drinking, and I did it. I just went through the motions, or I sometimes spent a really long time watching television and not really doing anything very exciting with my life. It sounds like lockdown, really, doesn't it? But all those times I wasn't writing, I wasn't, I look back and I think, what a waste of time. That I was just going through the motions, and I wasn't joyful, I wasn't enjoying my life. But I look back and I also know that perhaps that time was what I needed, like a caterpillar going into a cocoon, that time was what I needed to allow myself slowly to heal and to have that rest, because the rest is so important. When we're sick and we sleep all day, it's not wasted, even though I know when it happens to me, when I feel that ill, I feel like I'm wasting my life. I get really frustrated. But I also know it's the very best thing that I can do for myself, to allow my body to rest, to even, sleep, so that I don't have to, I don't have to deal with everything, and my body just starts to recover from whatever's going on. So if you are experiencing any of these feelings, feeling unworthy, feeling unlovable, to feeling that you can't carry on, you're not alone. You're not unlovable. You're not worthless. And sometimes, you have to keep hearing that. You have to keep telling yourself that until you get to a place of believing. And sometimes when you've spent a very long part of your life feeling those feelings, they can come back very quickly, and as a sort of a knee-jerk reaction in situations, to questioning ourselves and to really asking, who am I, what's going on, all these kind of things. And I always say, if you sit there and you ask those questions and you ask all these things, I think you must be quite an interesting person, because some people don't think about these things. Some of my friends will say I think about these things a lot more deeply, but I've had to kind of get away from those feelings. When you have a big sort of lockbox full of difficult feelings, it makes you want to understand, it makes you want to get over it, and it makes you want to help other people to get over it as well. And the most important thing that I teach and I work with is just trying to help people to find their bliss and their success. But sometimes that's incredibly challenging. I remember I've been teaching for quite a long time Zumba, and it started to have a really difficult effect on me, and I started to get really sick. I was feeling very nauseous and all this kind of stuff, and it was so scary. And one of the reasons was because it was making me feel more and more and more, and I was having to deal with more and more difficult emotions. And that's what happens when we live into our success, we live our dreams, we have these amazing times, the most beautiful times, and all the feelings come up, everything comes up. So the moments sometimes that should be the most blissful, the most amazing, can be really traumatic for us, because we can't hold back those feelings anymore. And I think that's probably sometimes why we have these sort of quieter times. We look back in life and think, well, I didn't really do much that year. It was a bit quiet, you know. But we are slowly healing, and we are slowly getting ready for those really emotional moments. And we're learning to deal with it. We're learning to deal with it. So I hope that helps in some ways. I wanted to do this video because I feel like sometimes it can sound very judgmental when people talk about feeling suicidal. It can feel a bit like them and us. And I spent a long time, I think in my 20s and 30s, explaining to people in my life, friends, people like that, when they had another person in their life who had experienced something like this, who had been suicidal, or who had had a, gone through a phase like that, gone through a difficult time like that, that they wouldn't understand it. They couldn't understand why somebody would ever feel that way. Why that would ever feel like something positive or something to do. Sounds like I'm saying that. And I do understand. I have been there. And it's incredibly painful to feel that way. And the other day, so I was doing one of those horrible e-consult forms for the GP, if you're trying to get an appointment with the GP, and I was putting in these questions, I got to this question, it was like, have you ever had, felt suicidal, whatever. I thought, how rude to ask this question, like on a form, how impersonal, how, one of the most horrible feelings and difficult feelings you can have, and it's reduced to this form that I'm supposed to just answer. I'm thinking, no, if I'm going to talk about this, it should be with a therapist in a really nice office with the tissues and all this and flowers and everything. But my knee-jerk reaction to that question was, I get migraines. And when I get migraines, sometimes the pain is so very bad, it can go up to a 10 on a pain scale, that of course it goes through my mind. Of course there are moments when, I just want the pain to end. And it's very, very hard to explain to somebody who hasn't experienced that level of pain, physical pain. And it's very hard to explain to somebody who hasn't felt that level of emotional pain or even mental pain. It's very hard to explain to somebody what the colour blue is if they've never seen the colour blue. It's very hard to explain to somebody what hunger is if they've never been hungry. And there's a huge world of different experiences and emotions and everything out there. But this is a sensitive subject, and it often gets used in dramas. It gets used, and people use it in films or in TV programs, things like that. And they don't always know what they're talking about, and they don't always do it in a sensitive way. And they don't always do it in a helpful way. So I really hope that I have done this in a helpful way. I've used my very soft and gentle voice the whole way through, so I really hope that helps. But the most important thing is really just, what I've always said is that if you ever have a voice that says, something inside that says, this is a way out, this would be a good idea, it's wrong. It's wrong, because as painful as it is at times, it is worth living. Life is worth living. And if you can just hold on, if you can just keep living, life gets so wonderful. And I always love those moments when I've been going through something really, really difficult, and I can feel it in my heart right now. I can feel a lot of the feelings I'm talking about, even though some of them are so old. And when I did the Camino and I was walking, I did the Camino de Santiago, and I walked and I walked and I walked. And there were so many times I was walking and I felt like I couldn't go on. I felt like I was going to give up. I felt like I was going to stop. And I would keep going. And then maybe the next morning, whenever it was, I would suddenly feel it was worth it. It was worth it to keep going. And the expression I used back then, and I'll use it to you right now, and it's one of the greatest expressions I've ever heard. When you're going through hell, keep going. Please, keep going. I'd say this to my younger self right now. You know, if I could go back and speak to my young teenage self, I'd say, well, there'd be a lot of words because I would be quite bossy because it's me. I would just say, you know, it's going to get so much better. You have no idea how good it's going to get. And you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it because your life is going to be wonderful. It's going to be exciting. And the fact that you can feel this way, the fact that you can ask these deep and meaningful questions, the fact that you are so sensitive or so passionate, or just that you've survived what you've survived so far. Wow, you are really an amazing person. And I really hope you can believe that. And I hope you can believe that when the time is right, you'll be able to share your amazingness with the world when you're ready. Maybe when the world is ready for you. But it will surprise you how quickly things can change. Lots of love. You take care of yourself. I'll see you soon. Bye.